Hey everyone, so I recently played in an over-the-board tournament. It was a one-day tournament with 5 rounds. The time control was game in 45 with a 5-second delay. And as part of my post-tournament game analysis and trying to make a good study plan going forward, I decided to enlist the help of my friend FIDE Master Nate Solon. We've had him on the channel before. Nate is an excellent chess coach, and I was really happy that he agreed to come on my stream and walk me through a couple of the games, explain the places where I went wrong, things I could have done better in my thought process, and also help me craft a plan for what I need to study in terms of classical chess going forward into the future. If you'd like to check out Nate's new online chess learning community, the Chess Gym, I will link that in the description. Enjoy the video.
But okay, yeah, well, let's check out the games. So round one, right? You're white, and you do go for the London. I'm also a London system player, so I'm
Awesome.
not a London hater. I like it. And then you mentioned you're looking. So you're right. There's two choices here, right? As far as move order, you can go with knight f3, or you can play c3 first. And in your notes, you mentioned you were looking at knight f3, but then you didn't feel that confident. And you just switched to c3. Actually, this is kind of funny because I did this exact same thing in my most recent tournament.
Oh, really?
I had this position. My preparation was also knight f3. I was playing, against a player where I was substantially higher rated. I don't know if people will be familiar with this, but the point is, if knight f3, knight c6, knight d2, there's this big main line here where black plays queen b6, and you don't have a very good way to defend b2. So usually you play d takes c5, queen takes b2, and it's this pawn sacrifice, and it gets like very, very wild and complicated. It's very against the reputation of the London. Everyone thinks the London is boring. This is like absolute insanity. Like rook b1, queen c3. They can play e6 or g6, and it gets very crazy from here. I think the main line goes something like this, and then you like sacrifice your knight, and
Yeah.
and it's like if you're wondering like why these moves make sense, like it's very hard to understand why these moves make sense if you don't have the engine on, or even if you do, honestly. I think it's a problem if like you spend the time to prepare something and then you don't feel confident to use it. Like that kind of indicates that mismatch between the preparation and what you use in a game is not what you want.
Right. And I had prepped that like big long like sacrificing main line like probably months earlier, and then with all the like stressful stuff in my family, I hadn't really done much opening prep, so I was looking at it a bit the night before, and I like weirdly like at the board was like I don't really feel like going into this right now, and so I just played c3, which I guess comes with its own territory of like having to know what to do.
A question that I'm trying to remember to ask is whenever I'm preparing an opening, I want to always be asking myself, would I be confident playing this in over the board game? Because if not, my preparation actually has no value. So on the previous move, c3 or knight f3 are both completely valid. But combining c3 with knight f3 here is actually a little bit weird.
Oh. Yeah, I guess I just so rarely play c3 that I'm like, well, I guess I'll just keep developing pieces.
Right. And this is the problem with abandoning your preparation, right? Because now you're in a line you don't know.
Yeah.
But here's where we kind of get into the history of the London. So, the London has gone through the whole cycle of being trendy and everyone hates it and whatever. Back in the day, it was considered very innocuous. And actually, this is one of the main reasons why, because in this position, black can go queen b6. Usually you play queen b3, right? This is like the typical way of defending. Yeah. c4. And then generally you don't want to initiate this trade because black gets the open a file.
Yeah, I played this a bit as black.
Yeah, and so this tends to be good. This can go either way. Black can initiate the trade or white can initiate the trade. But generally, you actually want to be the one recapturing with that rook pawn because you get your rook open.
Yeah.
And you can advance it. So this is pretty good for black. So typically, you would play queen c2. But then black has this nice move, bishop f5.
Right.
With the tempo on your queen. And you can't take that because queen takes f5, queen b2. Your rook is trapped. This doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you have to go queen c1. So you get in this position where black gained like a few tempi for bishop f5. If anyone is better here, it's black. I mean, it's not a disaster for white. You can just play this position. Like, it's not exciting, but you're not losing by any means. But, for years, this was considered like the best way to play against the London, and everyone knew this, and everyone knew it was good for black. So actually the whole point to bishop f4 move order where you don't play knight f3, one of the big points of that is in this exact position, you can play knight d2 and delay knight.
Oh,
And now if black tries to do the same thing, this is absolute nonsense here because I'll just take your bishop. The rook, here you could play rook b1. I think maybe queen b1 is even better because you can, oops, not bishop, but rather knight e2. Queen has to move, so black's down a piece,
oh,
white is crushing. So basically, this is actually one of the big ideas of why you delay knight f3 in the first place, to be able to play knight d2 in this position and avoid this line with queen b6, which is not good.
I vaguely remember this now
Yeah.
that you're bringing it up. But yeah, I just completely forgot that knight bd2 is the move.
That's one idea. And then as far as the knight f3 move, that's what people, so, people figured that out and they started playing the London again. Then at some point, I think this knight f3 move order, someone told me this, I don't know if this is even true. I believe there was a training camp with Carlsen and Kramnik actually at one point where they developed this knight f3 move order, and they figured, so knight f3, knight c6. Now here, again, remember the whole thing we're trying to avoid is this position.
Right.
But they figured out you can also do that by playing knight d2 here, and then if queen b6, there's this really interesting pawn sacrifice. It starts getting a lot easier to remember and use when you can connect everything together in this kind of story. It's hard to remember if it's all isolated moves and lines, but there's like a story and a logic that ties it all together. But your opponent played knight h5, which is a totally different thing. Bishop g3.
Yeah.
I mean, bishop g3, this is like a pretty standard London type move. And queen c2. Your opponent plays it's a c4, typically they play that when they're hitting the queen. I don't think it makes as much sense when your queen is already on c2. They played c4, knight d2, so you're developing. e4 looks like a very good move. When you see black's pawns like this, typically you're looking for either e4 or b3 at some point.
Yep.
To kind of break that up. So e4 looks good. And rook b1. Here I think you have some really interesting options. Yeah, what was your thought process here? Which moves did you consider?
So here, I had spent so much time on the previous move on e4, which in hindsight, it's like, it seems so obvious, but I wanted to just kind of like make up time. That's literally it. I was just like, okay, I need to hang on to that b pawn in case I ever want to move my queen, and then I just moved the rook. That was it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think so. This is an interesting moment to me because I feel like you've got a few choices, several very different choices that are promising, but that take the game in different directions. One is just e5. So we're grabbing space in the center. We're hoping maybe to play against the dark square. So black has put pretty much every single pawn on a light square, right? Which means their dark squares are going to be weak. So by putting my pawn on dark squares, I'm hoping to like maybe one day put a knight on f6 or something like that. There's also some logic to it because black does have the bishop pair. So to close the center, that's going to create a position that's more favorable for knights where the bishop pair is not very strong. Another thing I'm thinking about though is like black's king is in the center. So is there some way I can trade and then like exploit the e file? Now, I don't know if I necessarily want to do that right away because once I trade, bishop f5 is going to be coming out. But I was trying to make that idea work. Another really interesting move, it's not a typical London move whatsoever, but even castle queenside.
Oh.
And if black plays bishop g7, maybe now I'm going to trade and give this really annoying check.
Yeah, that looks good.
And I don't entirely know how black deals with this because if bishop e6, I'll just play knight e5, knight g5 now. Maybe I can even be more aggressive and do take pawn,
Ooh.
pin. Just
Yeah,
trying
that's
to
really nice.
trying to take advantage of the black king still being in the center and having all these pieces lined up.
Yeah, I think it's so hard to know what's quite right here because they do have the bishop pair, so like that's kind of what I was thinking later of like kind of closing down the center, locking up the pawns. But at the same time, like yeah, like you said, the king's in the middle, and I maybe should have at least considered ways to get a rook onto that e-file soon.
Yeah, and I found, in my experience, having a clear and decisive take on the position usually works out well, even if it's maybe not objectively like completely the best one. But just being able to play with like a clear plan and clear vision,
I
I
think I've
find
had issues with that
yeah.
recently.
And often it work, if you can just pursue one plan with some conviction, it seems to work out a lot of the time. So okay, we're developing, we're castling e5. Your opponent gave you an extra tempo to play e5, so they really were inviting that.
Yep.
The bishop goes back. Knight h. I like this maneuver. The knight's coming out here, pawn's coming up. So I think this all makes sense. King f2. One of the big themes I noticed in several of your games is king safety.
Yes, I would agree.
You had, in a lot of games in this tournament, your king ended up in like a weird advanced position in the middle game, which is not typically what. Actually, here it is not bad because the position is so closed, and you're also getting your rook over to the h file.
Right.
So actually, I think king f2 is absolutely the right move here, and your king is doing okay. In some of the other games from the later rounds, your king started walking up the boards in situations where it was actually a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, I think I know what games you're talking about.
So I don't know. I guess we'll get to them, but actually for right now, king f2 is a very good move. And g4. So yeah, we're almost in. This is like a French structure now, actually, that we've gotten into.
Yeah,
Which
it kind of
you
is.
French with black, right?
I do, yep.
3. So now we've got kings opposite sides. So you want to open up the queen side where black's king is. So b3, which you did, has to be the plan. Maybe you could have even done it here. Because this knight on g4, I kind of like because it's sort of restricting black from playing, maybe something like f6.
Oh, yeah. I guess my thought process was like it's not protected by anything, but like looking at it concretely, it's like, well, what's gonna attack it?
I mean, you definitely don't want to take this, I think, because then g takes, and that's opening up another line towards your king.
Yeah.
So I don't think you really want to take that anyway.
Yeah, I think I must have just been so worried about that knight causing issues on f5.
I mean, it looks kind of impressive because it's on this square where it's supported, but I don't know if it's actually doing, like, it doesn't really have any jumps from here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's actually doing all that much. Yeah, so I think, so I definitely like, with b3 here, you hit upon the right plan. If you can just shut down your opponent's attack and then sort of crush them at your leisure, sometimes that's a little bit nicer than calculating that you're winning in some complicated race. So this makes a lot of sense. Rook c1. Yeah, here, like in this position, I thought you're just absolutely crushing. And then suddenly, though, king d7, like if the king can run over here,
Right.
it's actually not that simple at all.
Yeah, and at this point, I was like, well, I gotta go fast now because the king's gonna get away from all my threats.
Well, you could either go fast or you could kind of keep the position close because like you're not committed yet. Once you play c4 and this bishop gets opened into the game, now it's very double-edged. There's a big choice here, right, of how you would take this one.
Yeah.
Between the bishop or the knight.
Yeah, the knight ended up working out, but I did take a peek at the engine, and I think it liked the bishop taking here better. I didn't really look why.
So in the game, how did you make that decision?
I guess I just wanted to be able to bring the knight in and check, and I like obviously now it's like, well, they could just avoid the check by going to e8 after I take with the knight, and then it's not really doing much.
What I'm wondering is if knight takes, so your opponent played bishop d5, after which I think you had a nice combination, but if black plays king e8, I'm not sure what to do. And as white, I feel like I need a really good move, right? Like on this move, because if this king runs over here, then I don't have any attack at all. Meanwhile, since the position has opened up, the bishops are going to get stronger, and I've advanced all my pawns, right? Which is, in a closed position, I can advance all those guys and control a lot of space, and that's great. If the position becomes more open, then that's going to leave behind a ton of well, they're weak, they're probably going to be a gigantic problem for me. So it's like, unless I actually have a good move right now, it looks to me like this position is getting really, really dangerous. And I'm not sure if I do see the move for white.
I was going to say, I do not see a move. Yeah, it's definitely harder to play than it was just a few moves ago because, yeah, you're right. It's opened up, and now the bishop pair is like a lot stronger.
But I think bishop takes c4 is also a very serious consideration because you're fighting for the light squares a lot more. Not like knight take this knight, which was controlling d5. If you move it to a light square, it no longer controls light squares. So that means black has this relatively strong blockade here. In contrast, bishop takes c4. Now the knight and bishop are both fighting for d5, which I think is a move I really want. Additionally, if black tries to run with king e8, here I have a very interesting possibility. Do you know? Can you guess what move I'm thinking of here?
Interesting one. Something with like taking on e6.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking to sack this bishop. That's 2 pawns. Black's king is caught in the center. I'm looking at this pawn as well. I'm looking at d5. This looks extremely, extremely promising. And what was the time control of this event?
45 with 5-second delay.
Okay, so it was pretty fast. So not a ton of time to think. But I would so my number 1 big theme was king safety, and then my number 2 theme, which I think you also picked out, is calculation. Because I kind of get the impression that in a lot of positions, it's maybe not so much that like you're miscalculating or calculating incorrectly, but actually you're not calculating at all. Like in very concrete positions where there are 4 sequences of moves, I have the feeling maybe you're not sort of grinding through those moves. You're kind of making decisions based on general principles.
That is probably true, yes. And calculation has been something I've been working on a bit, but it doesn't help that when I play on stream, I am grinding like bullet where you don't have to calculate. So I think that was pretty much my preparation for this tournament, was playing fast games.
So, well, definitely bullet, you're not going to be able to calculate at all. But actually, even in rapid, so you've played what have you played the most? Like 10 plus 0 or 15? Like what rapid time control do you do?
Yeah, I play 10-0.
Right. So even 10-0, I mean, it's not bullet, but it's still extremely fast. I mean, it's pretty it's like bordering right up against blitz. So I think this is actually the biggest thing for you. If your goal is to like take that next step and over the board chess, I do think calculation is going to be the single biggest thing for you. I mean, the way to work on that is pretty simple. It's not easy, but it's pretty simple. You just, get a book with some difficult calculation exercises, and you kind of just grind through those,
I've got books sitting here. I should start using them.
Yeah. You can also do chess.com puzzles, but I would say, if you're working on OTB, you can even set those up on a physical board to get that, to make your training as like relevant as possible.
Yeah, I do like to do that because especially learning how to play online, and like that is primarily where I play. Like, I think a lot of times my calculation stuff suffers over the board, and it's gotten better now. But especially when I first started playing, and like even in the last year, I think it was a very big difference in my skills when I was playing with actual pieces instead of a computer screen. So.
Okay, so knight takes c4, and now, if king e8, I think the game would have been very much on. Now here you got to come in with a check, and I think that's pretty much game over, isn't it?
Yeah, they're either losing a piece here, or they are losing a piece.
Yeah. So if, I guess the best black can do is lose a piece, because queen takes, king e8, probably black's best choice relatively speaking, but you just took, so you came out ahead of bishop here. You could also take this one because this queen is still attacked.
Yeah, that was the other one I was looking at. I figured I wanted to get my rook up to the 7th rank, and
yeah. I mean, you can take your pick here. They're both winning because you're going to be up at least a piece. You get a rook on the 7th, which is good. You trade off queens, which when you're up a piece, there's certainly no problem with trading some pieces. And knight c8, and I think your opponent decided to resign here, which is fair enough. You're up a piece and you're dominating.